My name is Carol Whitman, 67 years old, a widow currently living alone in Seattle. I used to be a university lecturer, once standing behind a podium with hundreds of students seated before me. But 3 months ago, at my daughter's wedding, I was placed outside under a temporary canopy near the parking lot, while the groom's relatives crowded and laughed inside the grand hall. When I stepped inside to congratulate my daughter, my son-in-law gently stopped me and said, "This area is for primary guests, ma'am." Have you ever felt like you were pushed out of your own child's life? Have you ever been treated like a shadow in your own family, just because you're quiet and don't make a scene? If you've ever been hurt by being dismissed, leave a comment below. Hit like if you've ever stayed silent just to keep the peace. And don't forget to subscribe, because after that day, I opened the safe my husband left behind. And inside was the beginning of a battle they never saw coming. I arrived home after dark, my heels chilled from the concrete floor that hadn't yet warmed since the afternoon rain. I hung my wet coat on the hook and stood still in the foyer. From the window, the yellow streetlights cast blurry shadows on the empty road. My house, once filled with the sound of piano and the scent of morning coffee from my husband, now echoed only the ticking wall clock and the quiet breath of someone living alone. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea, set it on the table, but didn't drink. His words still echoed in my head, light as a feather, sharp as a blade. This area is for primary guests. I didn't cry, but a heavy fog settled over my memory, making it hard to breathe. I opened the drawer beneath the staircase. The small key was still resting inside the wooden box next to a folded piece of paper with frayed edges. Thomas's familiar handwriting sent a sharp pang through my chest. When you feel like you can't trust anyone, go down to the basement. Behind the old bookshelf, there's a small door. The code is our birthday, no spaces. I'd kept that paper for nearly 2 years. On sleepless nights, I had stood before the basement door, clutching the key, then turned away. I thought I wasn't ready. But tonight, after being stripped of my place as a mother, I was ready. I stepped down each wooden stair, the old planks creaking under my feet. The bookshelf Thomas used for his teaching materials from his Harvard days stood silent. I slid it aside. And there it was. A metal door, small but solid, clearly built not for show but for safeguarding something important. I typed in the familiar string of numbers, the day we met, the day we fell in love. A dry click echoed in the silence. The door opened. An old safe appeared, wrapped in moisture-proof cloth. I turned the handle, opened it, and the warm light revealed stacks of thick documents arranged like a miniature library. No cash, no gold, just files. But what I saw made my heart pound wildly. I carefully carried everything to the kitchen table. Each bank account had been opened years ago under unfamiliar names. There were companies registered in Bermuda, assets in private trusts in Switzerland, and at the very bottom, a letter, neatly folded, the ink fading with time. Carol, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. And if you're opening this safe, it means what I feared has happened. I knew eventually they would come. It could be friends, it could be family, it could be people you once believed would never hurt you. But you have to be stronger than they think. I'm not leaving behind just wealth. I'm leaving you with the tools to protect yourself. Nearly $48 million, scattered across trusts that no one can access without your security code. I hid it not to deceive you, but so no one else could take it from you. You can choose to stay silent, but if you decide to act, then act like the woman I loved my whole life. Tomas? I set the letter down, my hands trembling. I didn't cry. What I felt wasn't sorrow. It was a shockwave from within. All these years, I'd lived as a quiet widow, keeping to myself, avoiding conflict, believing that life after Thomas was just an afterthought. But now, I realized he had trusted me enough to entrust me with everything, and with a mission he couldn't finish. I sat for hours, reading every transaction, every legal clause, every investment agreement dated back to times when I didn't even know my husband had such financial acumen. Each page was evidence. He had never been weak as he appeared. And I, the one he chose to inherit this defensive network, couldn't go on living the same way. I closed my eyes and saw Tomas's face, not the frail man with heart problems in his final years, but the professor who once stood before students and said, "Knowledge is a weapon, and sometimes silence is how you load it." I stood up, walked to the wine cabinet. I pulled out a bottle of Italian wine Thomas had bought to celebrate our 40th anniversary. He never lived to see that day, but perhaps this was the occasion to open it. And I poured the first glass, not for remembrance, but to prepare for the battle he had set in motion 2 years ago. Because I was starting to understand, my son-in-law didn't just want to control my life. He wanted everything Thomas had left behind. And more than that, he had no idea that I was no longer just a vulnerable widow. 3 days after the wedding, my phone rang just before noon. I had just watered the backyard plants, my hands still wet as I answered. Nathan's voice came through, smooth like a well-rehearsed melody. "Hi, Mom Carol. I hope it's not too much trouble to bother you this afternoon." I wiped my hands on my apron, keeping my voice calm. "What is it, Nathan?" "I was thinking, how about dinner together? Just you and me. Rebecca said you like Italian food. I just found a charming little place near downtown." I looked up at the windless sky. Before, if someone asked if I'd like to have dinner alone with my new son-in-law, I would have laughed in surprise. But now, every sweet word from Nathan made me wary. "I've got plans tonight. How about tomorrow?" "Perfect. 7 o'clock? I'll make the reservation." I agreed, not too quickly, not too hesitantly, just enough for him to believe I was still the easygoing mother-in-law. No suspicion at all. The next evening, I picked a soft gray dress with a high collar. Nothing flashy, but not too plain either. I walked into the restaurant where Nathan had booked a table in the far corner. Warm golden lights, gentle music, and servers so discreet they were nearly invisible. Nathan stood to greet me, his smile bright like something poured from a corporate training manual. "You look perfect. This place really suits you." I sat down, smiled lightly. "Thank you. This place was carefully chosen." We ordered. Nathan picked a wine with a name so long the waiter had to pronounce it twice. He talked about the honeymoon, the plan to buy a new home, then slid into familiar territory. Cash flow, real estate, adjusting personal investment portfolios. After a few glasses of wine, Nathan set down his glass, leaned in slightly, and lowered his voice like he was about to share a family secret. "Mom Carol, to be honest, I'm really happy to be part of this family. Rebecca is an amazing woman, and you gave her that strength." I tilted my head, kept my smile. "You do have a way with words." "I mean every word, and because I truly consider you family, I'd like to bring up something important, not for my sake, but for Rebecca's." I sat in silence, waiting. "I think you should consider setting up a few simple power of attorney documents, not because you're not mentally capable, of course, but in case anything unexpected happens, Rebecca could help you handle financial or medical matters. It would just make things easier and safer for you." "You mean I should transfer some control of my assets to my daughter?" "Just on paper. You'd still make all the decisions, but Rebecca would have the authority to act on your behalf in emergencies, like if you needed to be hospitalized or if there was any legal dispute over your estate." The way Nathan presented it sounded thoughtful, wrapped in family concern. But I'd spent over 20 years teaching in the economics department. I knew when a suggestion was just a hook hiding a barbed end. I set my wineglass down, the smile still on my face. "Sounds reasonable, but for something like this, I'd need to consult my own attorney." Nathan gave a light laugh and nodded like it was no big deal. "Of course. I just wanted to run it by you first, make sure everything goes smoothly." We ended dinner with a bland panna cotta and a few polite goodbyes, but as I stepped out of the restaurant, the night air felt colder. At that moment, I no longer had any doubts. Nathan was trying to open a door he didn't know already had a trap waiting behind it. That night, I sat in my reading room, warm yellow light falling across a steaming cup of tea. I opened my contacts list and scrolled down to a name I hadn't dialed in 4 years: Lauren Pierce. Lauren had once been my student. Later, she became an estate attorney, one who worked with clients no one thought needed protecting, until someone close to them turned predatory. The call lasted barely 10 minutes. "I need a meeting as soon as possible," I said, "not because I need help, but because I've just seen the first sign of someone who thinks I'm prey." Lauren was quiet for a beat. "I'll be there within 2 days. And Ms. Carroll, if someone's targeting you, they've picked the wrong person." I hung up, closed the phone, then walked back toward the safe in the basement once more. I didn't need to open it that night, but I needed to feel the weight of that small key in my palm again, not just to remind myself of the power I held, but to be sure. I was ready to use it. A week after that dinner, I received a strange envelope from the King County Court. I opened it, and the cold print hit me square in the face. Petition to establish legal guardianship over Ms. Carol Whitman, age 67, due to signs of cognitive decline affecting financial and medical competence. I didn't react right away. I sat down on the sofa, clutching the paper so tightly I could hear it crumple. The petitioner's name was bold at the top: Nathan Carter. Alongside it was a psychological evaluation signed by a doctor I had never met. He didn't just want to control me. He wanted to legally erase me from my own life. I quietly brewed a pot of black tea, laid the petition on the table, picked up my phone, and dialed Lauren. "I'm here, Miss Carroll." "Nathan just filed with the court," I said slowly, trying to stay calm. "He's seeking full guardianship. There's a doctor's signature, claiming I no longer have full cognitive function." The line went silent for a few seconds. "I'm on my way. Are you free tomorrow morning?" "I've got the whole week, the whole month, the whole year, if that's what it takes." The next morning, Lauren arrived at my house at exactly 8:30. Simple navy suit, hair pulled back, eyes sharp and focused. She sat across from me, opened her briefcase, and spread the documents across the table like someone used to handling fire. "I've reviewed it thoroughly. The petitioner's relying on a flimsy evaluation, no in-person interview, just indirect information from unnamed sources. The diagnosis is mild cognitive impairment, but there are no lab tests, no recordings of any exam. Do you know this doctor?" "Never heard of him." "Then chances are he's one of theirs, known for signing off on these types of cases." I stayed silent for a moment, gazing through the window where sunlight filtered through the maple trees in the yard. "Nathan is using the law to do what others might use brute force for," I said quietly. "He thinks that if he can prove I'm mentally unfit, everything I own will go to Rebecca, and through her, to him." Lauren nodded. "And I don't think this is his first time doing this." I looked up. "You have proof?" "Not yet, but enough suspicion." I searched guardianship cases where Nathan's current attorney was listed in the last 3 years. At least 4 similar cases came up. They all had the same pattern: elderly victims, no sons, clearly documented assets, and all lost their control after just one court session. I nodded slightly. "What would you say if we brought in someone who knows how to navigate the shadows?" Lauren smirked. "You're thinking of Aiden?" I smiled. "I think it's time to call him." Aiden Blake was another former student of mine. Back in the day, he was the top of my financial risk management class. After graduation, he'd pivoted into private investigation, a mind sharp as any analyst, but with the grit of someone who stared down the darker side of the system. That evening, I sent Aiden a single message: "If you've ever thought about paying me back, today's the day." Less than 30 minutes later, the phone rang. Where are you? Home. I'll be there by 10 tomorrow morning. The next day, Aiden arrived with a tablet, a thick folder, and a gaze that could cut steel. After I explained the entire situation, he sat quietly for a few minutes, then said, "I've come across the name Nathan Carter before. It showed up in a report on suspicious ownership transfers in Oregon. A man with the same name, age, and profession once held temporary ownership on behalf of an elderly woman, then transferred her property into a shell corporation. Can you trace it? If you let me use what you have, I'll track it all the way to the floor he's standing on." I nodded. "You have my permission. And if needed, I'll give you access to all the records Tomas left behind." Aiden turned to Lauren. "If we want the court to throw out the guardianship petition, we need a counter-medical report. Ms. Carroll should be reevaluated, but this time by someone on our side." Lauren agreed. "I'll schedule an appointment with a respected forensic psychiatrist here in Seattle. If Ms. Carroll passes the evaluation, we can move to dismiss the petition in the preliminary hearing." I sighed. "I'm not afraid of the test, Lauren. I'm just afraid my daughter won't understand." The room went quiet. I got up and walked down the hallway to where Rebecca's graduation photo hung. I used to believe she'd have a peaceful life, but if I can't stop Nathan, everything Thomas worked so hard to protect will be taken by the very man Rebecca calls her husband. I turned back and looked at the two people waiting for my decision. "Let's begin," I said. "The game Nathan just started. I'm playing it to the end." Aiden returned to my house Tuesday afternoon, his face more tense than usual. He didn't say anything upon entering. He set his laptop on the dining table, opened a series of folders quickly, his eyes never leaving the screen. "You should sit down," he said, his voice low and urgent. I pulled out a chair, my chest tightening a bit, not from fear, but because I was already starting to imagine what I was about to hear wouldn't just involve me. And I was right. Aiden turned the screen toward me. On it was a financial flow chart, laid out as clearly as a textbook on asset management. Arrows connecting bank accounts, shell companies, and the final recipients of funds. Among them, the name that appeared most prominently was Eli Carter, Nathan's father. "Ms. Carroll, this is a model of illegal asset transfers I just reconstructed from public data, combined with hidden transaction files I got from an international remittance firm. I haven't accessed their internal system yet, but this is enough to make any investigator reopen a case." I looked at the names of the victims listed beside the chart. Sarah Monaghan, 82, Frank Delaney, 74, Josephine Bright, 91. All had lost contact with their families for years. All had transferred property rights to someone named Carter within 3 months before being moved into nursing homes. 2 of them had already passed away. All of these individuals were persuaded to sign a power of attorney packet similar to the one Nathan gave you, Aiden continued. Their financial handler, on paper at least, was a series of consulting firms founded by Eli Carter over the past decade. After that, their assets were funneled into untraceable investment funds, and they were cut out entirely. I gripped the armrest tightly. 3 people, I said slowly. 3 people erased from their own lives. And Nathan is the next generation of this operation. Aiden nodded. And I'm afraid they didn't stop at 3. This is a system. A model that's been repeated for years. Just legal enough to pass as legitimate. Just sophisticated enough to escape the law. I stayed quiet for a moment, my eyes fixed on the diagram. Another faint line appeared. Money flowing from an account in Las Vegas into an investment fund under Eli's name, then almost entirely withdrawn a week later at a private resort in Arizona. "Gambling," I said, voice dry. "That's what I think," Aiden confirmed. "They're using money taken from victims to pay off their own debts and expand their network." I stood and walked to the window, gripping the edge of my sweater. I had suspected Nathan. I had seen the coldness in his eyes, hidden behind his charm. but I hadn't expected him to be a link in such a long-standing and organized chain. I turned to Aiden. "Do you have enough to open a federal file?" "Almost," he replied. "But if you agree, I think it's time to bring someone else in. Someone with the authority to turn this data into action." I nodded. "Call Dana Holloway. Tell her Carol Whitman has something she needs to hear." Dana Holloway was a federal agent specializing in high-level financial crime. I met her once during a lecture I gave on money laundering and estate fraud for a group of hand-picked law students from Washington, D.C. Dana had been the only one who didn't take notes. Just sat, listened, and asked 3 questions, each one like a drill piercing straight into the structure of my lecture. The next morning, Dana was in my living room. She wore a white shirt, gray blazer, no visible weapon, but carried the kind of presence that left no doubt she could order the arrest of a man twice her size with a single frown. Aiden opened his laptop and presented everything he had gathered. Dana didn't take notes, only interrupted with a few questions. Precise, specific, targeting the vulnerabilities in the model. When he finished, she sat in silence for a moment, then spoke. "The first 3 cases were once opened by our office, but due to a lack of connection between the victims, there wasn't enough to proceed. But with the evidence Mr. Blake just presented, and the fact that Ms. Whitman is currently being targeted through a guardianship petition, we can reopen the investigation under the scope of a federal fraud organization." I sat upright, eyes fixed on Dana. "What do you need from me?" "We need you to play yourself, an elderly widow starting to suspect her son-in-law, requesting financial clarification, legal assistance, and potentially willing to sign, if convinced, the right way." I nodded. "I can do that." Dana looked at me, her gaze as if checking one last time whether I truly understood what lay ahead. "Are you sure, Ms. Whitman? Once you step into this, there's no going back." I answered without hesitation. "I'm not here to back down. I'm here to finish what my husband didn't get the chance to." Dana paused for a beat, then gave a slight nod. "Then starting today, we set the trap." I looked over at Aiden. His expression no longer held the doubt I'd seen at the beginning, only quiet admiration. And I knew, even though the battle hadn't started, I was no longer alone. That afternoon, I was trimming the lavender bushes on the porch when the gate bell rang. I looked up and saw Rebecca's eyes through the iron fence. Her face was pale, dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept all night. I opened the gate without a word. She didn't speak either. Just walked into the house, straight into the living room, and collapsed onto the couch like she could barely stay upright. I brought her a glass of water, set it in front of her, then sat beside her. "What's wrong?" I asked softly, my voice light as steam. And Rebecca looked up, and with just one sentence, I knew her heart was breaking. "Mom, Nathan isn't who I thought he was." I didn't respond. I waited. "These past few weeks, he kept asking about you. If you planned to transfer any assets, if you mentioned anything about the unsigned documents. Then he sent me a loan contract, asking me to co-sign for a real estate deal in Arizona." I gently squeezed her hand. "Did you sign it?" "No, but I almost did, if you hadn't sent me that recording yesterday." I still remember the moment I hit send on that email. The audio file was under 10 minutes long. Nathan, sitting in my living room, speaking gently as he tried to convince me to sign full power of attorney, laced with lines like, "It'll be easier if she lose capacity," and "Rebecca would feel so relieved if you didn't resist." Alongside it were vague, pressuring emails he had sent me in recent days. Rebecca took a deep breath, eyes staring into the distance. I listened to that recording at least 10 times, and with every listen, something inside me cracked. Mom, I married someone I didn't truly know. I trusted him. You saw that. I trusted him enough to bring him into our family, to stand in front of Dad's altar and vow. Her voice caught. I handed her a tissue. She took it, folded it carefully, and laid it on her lap without wiping her tears. I feel like a fool, she went on. I thought I was building a home, but it turns out I was just the bridge he used to get to you. I stayed silent for a moment, then placed my hand gently on my daughter's shoulder. You're not a fool, Rebecca. You're someone who believed in something you thought was good. We've all done that. The difference is, you stopped when it mattered. Rebecca turned to me, her brown eyes, usually full of light, now blurred by exhaustion. What do I do now, Mom? You keep living, but with full awareness. No more blind faith. No more halfway answers. If you need time to think, I'll give you time. But if you want to stand with me, not to take sides, but to protect the truth, then I'll be right here. With you. She nodded slowly, as if each word was etching itself into her. I feel ashamed, she whispered. Ashamed of what? For letting him in so deep, for doubting you when you stayed quiet, for thinking you were just being difficult because you're getting older. I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head. I am older, and I can be difficult, but that doesn't mean I deserved your doubt. Rebecca lowered her head. I wrapped my arms around her, feeling the subtle tremble in her chest. For years, I had grown used to her being fiercely independent, rarely needing anyone. But holding her now, I realized that underneath the woman she'd become was still a girl, one who had just lost her illusion of love. You might lose your husband, I said gently, but you won't lose your mother, not ever. She didn't reply, but I felt her arms tighten around me. She stayed at my house for 3 nights, no calls, no messages. Nathan was clearly preoccupied with plans he didn't realize were already collapsing from the inside. On the 3rd evening, Rebecca stepped into the kitchen while I was toasting almonds. She stood silently for a moment, then spoke without meeting my eyes. Mom, if I decide to end this marriage, would you stand with me? In court. In heart. I turned off the stove, turned to her, and embraced her once more. You never had to ask that, Rebecca, because I've never stood anywhere else but by your side. In that moment, I knew the battle ahead wasn't just mine and Nathan's. It was a fight to reclaim trust in my daughter, in myself, and in what's right and wrong when so many try to blur the line. And Rebecca, by choosing to see the truth, had begun to rise. No longer the girl in a white wedding dress, but a woman learning how to defend what cannot be replaced by hollow promises. I called Nathan on Monday morning. My voice was slow enough not to alarm him, warm enough to make him believe I was wavering. Nathan, I've been thinking about what you said the other day. Maybe you were right. On the other end, a sharp pause, tight like a bowstring. Then his voice softened. Really? You've reconsidered? I didn't sleep well last night. I think maybe I've been too stubborn. If those documents could help Rebecca feel more at ease, then maybe I should think it over. That's wonderful. Where would you like to sign? At the office or at your home? At home. I'll feel more comfortable there. I paused. But I want a witness present, someone I trust. Nathan agreed instantly, without a hint of suspicion. No problem. I'll bring a notary with me. Is tomorrow afternoon all right? 3 o'clock. Be on time. The next afternoon, I set out a tray of peppermint tea and 2 small plates of cookies on the living room table. On the bookshelf behind the couch, a hidden camera disguised as a desk clock was ready to record. A discreet recorder was tucked into the armchair where I usually read. All equipment provided and tested by the FBI that morning, personally checked by Dana and Aiden. I wore a thick gray dress, my mother's old pearl bracelet on my wrist, a piece Nathan once called simple but rich in depth. I sat upright, composed, lips softly pressed, no extra expression, nothing given away. At exactly 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I answered it myself. Nathan stood there in a light brown coat, white shirt, and charcoal gray tie. Beside him was a woman in her early 40s, carrying a leather bag and a folder, her face steady with the seriousness of someone who's notarized 1,000 forms. Nathan smiled and bowed slightly. "You look wonderful, as always." I nodded and welcomed them in. Once seated, he began organizing the papers on the table. The file was divided into 3 sections, each page marked with sticky notes for signature. Nathan's voice was calm, smooth, like a consultant walking an elderly client through routine documents. "This is a general power of attorney form that allows Rebecca, and by order, myself, to assist you in emergencies, financial or medical. Just precaution, of course. I'm sure you understand." I nodded slightly, pretending to study each page like someone still cautiously undecided. He continued, "There's nothing binding in any major way. You keep ownership of your assets. Medical authority only applies with an official diagnosis of incapacity. It's all meant to protect you." I signed the first page without hesitation, signed the second with a slightly controlled tremble. On the final page, the critical one about legal representation and control over assets if the signer is deemed unfit, I paused. I set the pen down, looked straight into Nathan's eyes. "Are you sure you've read this part carefully?" I asked, my voice low but clear. He furrowed his brow. "Of course, it's just confirming necessary information. Nothing to worry about." I turned the folder around and tapped a tiny line at the bottom of the page. This line, right here. "If the signer has any doubt about the agent's integrity, control automatically transfers to a third-party witness. In this case, that would be federal agent Dana Holloway." The room fell suddenly, painfully silent. Nathan looked at me, then at the woman beside him. The notary's face stayed neutral, but her eyes flicked, just briefly, toward the corner of the room where the hidden camera recorded. "What?" Nathan asked, his voice dropping half a tone. "You're joking, right?" I shook my head slowly. "No, Nathan, this isn't a joke. This is an investigation." The living room door swung open. Dana stepped in, 2 plainclothes FBI agents behind her. One moved toward the clock camera, the other gathered the file from the table. Nathan shot to his feet, his eyes darkening. "What the hell are you doing, Mom?" I remained seated, my hand resting on the table. "I'm protecting what Tomas spent his entire life keeping safe, and I'm doing what any mother would do when her child is being dragged into the dirty game of a greedy man." He clenched his fists, lips twitching with fury. "You set me up." Dana stepped forward, calmly presenting the search warrant, her tone so steady it chilled the room. "Nathan Carter, you're under investigation for exploiting power of attorney to seize assets from elderly individuals. From this moment on, everything you say and do will be recorded and may be used as evidence in court." Nathan turned to me, his face twisted in anger and disbelief. "You're going to regret this." I stood, walked closer, and whispered just loud enough for him to hear. "I don't regret it. I only regret letting my daughter marry someone like you." He was escorted out without another word. The door closed softly behind him, just as quietly as it had opened. I sat back down. The room was silent, but the weight had lifted, the peppermint tea was still warm, and I knew from that moment on, the real counterattack had begun. That evening, before the lights in the living room were fully turned off, I heard cars pulling up at the gate. Not one, but several. Red and blue lights reflected off my walls through the window. Dana stepped inside first, unhurried, silent. But I understood. This was it. The curtain had been ripped away. "We're executing simultaneous operations," she said, her voice low but resolute. "Eli Carter's office, the other 2 shell companies, and a data storage facility in New Mexico. We have warrants for everything. This operation has gone on far too long." About 2 hours later, I received a call from Aiden. His voice carried a quiet intensity. "They got Eli. He's stuck in the conference room with 3 attorneys. Didn't have time to delete anything. All servers are sealed." "What about the others?" I asked, gripping my tea glass to stay grounded. 14 people involved have been arrested. 2 were former notary officers, 1 worked in the city's legal aid office. They're all being charged with conspiracy to defraud the elderly. I closed my eyes for a moment, not out of satisfaction, but because of a deep, heavy ache pressing against my chest. What we had uncovered today was far bigger than anything I had imagined. The next morning, I was summoned urgently to the federal office. Dana handed me a flash drive, her face more serious than usual. We found this in Nathan's safe. It was encrypted with 3 layers of security. If we hadn't located an old email he sent himself 5 years ago with the password hint, it could have taken us a month to crack. I put on my glasses and nodded. The screen lit up with a list of folders. One was named Reserve, nearly 100 gigabytes of data. Dozens of secretly recorded videos, call recordings, contract photos, scanned authorization forms. I went still as I opened the first video. An elderly woman sat in a dimly lit apartment, her hands trembling as she held a pen. Nathan sat beside her, speaking softly, almost in a whisper. "If you don't sign this, the bank will repossess your apartment. I just want to help you." Her voice was faint. "But my son's coming home soon. He doesn't know." "Auntie, if you wait, it might be too late. This is to get you into better care." She signed. The video then cut to footage of her being driven to a nursing facility in the suburbs. Notes attached to the file stated she passed away a week later from exhaustion. None of her family arrived in time to say goodbye. I stood from the desk. I couldn't keep watching. I couldn't stomach another second without feeling like I would burst. "How many cases like this?" I asked. Dana opened a preliminary summary file. "We've confirmed 11 victims so far. 3 have passed away. Over $30 million in assets were funneled into companies controlled by Eli and Nathan. None of the families had any idea." The story spread faster than anything I'd seen. 3 days later, I woke up to an inbox flooded with messages. Dozens of calls from news stations, major newspapers, even from families who'd lost touch with their elderly parents. On TV, images of me standing at my front door, Nathan being led away in handcuffs, appeared across major networks. NBC, CNN, ABC. A special evening segment even spent 20 minutes breaking down the fraud operation targeting the elderly, with the headline, "The 62-year-old woman who took down a scamming empire." I gave no interviews. I declined every media request. I didn't do this to be famous. I'm just a mother, a widow, a woman who once believed justice was for someone else. But then I realized, sometimes, if you don't stand up, no one else will. Rebecca returned to my house over the weekend. Her eyes were still swollen, but her gaze was clear. "You did the right thing," she said. "And if I hadn't woken up when I did, I would have been part of it too." I held her tightly and said nothing more, because sometimes the deepest comfort is silence. We don't know how many layers are left to uncover, but I do know this. Now, not just me, but the entire country is beginning to re-examine how we protect the elderly, the vulnerable, the ones long dismissed as voiceless. And I've only just begun to speak up. One crisp autumn morning, I received a letter from the Federal Office of Elder Policy. Simple paper, formal lettering. But the message struck me still. They were inviting me to help develop a new national program. A system to protect seniors from financial exploitation. From coerced signatures to subtle legal manipulation. I almost said no. Honestly, after everything, I just wanted a few quiet months with my daughter, tending to the backyard garden Thomas once filled with lavender. But Rebecca took my hand, her eyes glowing with trust and a soft smile. "Mom, if not you, then who?" So I said yes. The program was named Silver Shield. A silver shield, symbol of protection, dignity, and quiet resilience. I didn't want it to be another policy sheet pinned in a government building. I wanted it in every small town welfare office, every local courtroom, every place where an 87-year-old woman living alone could ring a bell and be heard. Together with a team of lawyers, psychologists, investigators, and even volunteers who had once been victims themselves, we built screening standards and training programs for bank staff, notaries, and home nurses. In just the first 6 months, more than 3,000 cases received support. There were late-night calls from elderly men in Idaho, trembling because a distant relative was trying to take their house. There were handwritten letters from women in Georgia saying they still kept the mortgage contract hidden in a kitchen drawer, unsure of who to trust. Silver Shield was present in 22 states in less than 12 months. We partnered with churches, schools, hospitals, even insurance companies. I still remember the day the New Jersey branch opened. An elderly woman came up to shake my hand, then broke into tears. She said, "I never thought I'd live to see the day America stood up for people like us." A year had passed since Nathan was arrested. The final trial concluded in December. He was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison for systematic financial fraud, legal document manipulation, and being complicit in the death of an elderly victim. Eli Carter and 2 shell company directors received lighter sentences due to cooperation with investigators. I didn't go to court that day. I didn't need to see him again, but I knew clearly justice isn't about someone being in handcuffs. It's about victims stepping back into the light with their dignity intact. The following spring, I was invited to Washington, D.C. That night, in a warmly lit auditorium, amid long applause and glittering lights, I was awarded the Presidential Medal of Civil Liberty. I stood there, the medal gleaming against the deep navy fabric of my simple blazer, not feeling special in the slightest. I'd just thought of that winter afternoon, sitting quietly beside an old safe, reading Thomas's handwritten letter. "You have to be stronger than they think." I didn't cry, but I felt him somewhere behind me, nodding, just like he used to whenever I said something that made him proud. Rebecca sat in the front row, gripping my hand tightly throughout the ceremony. Later, in the back seat of a taxi headed to the hotel, she turned to me, her voice warm and steady. "You know I've started writing, right?" I looked at her, surprised. "Writing what?" "A book. About you. About everything you've done, everything you endured in silence. About a woman no one expected to become America's quiet warrior." I laughed, trying to hide my embarrassment. "Rebecca, you make it sound like I'm some kind of superhero." "No." She shook her head, her eyes shining. "You're a mother, and that's the greatest thing of all." In that moment, I didn't need anything else. No medals, no titles, no spotlight could ever compare to the way my daughter looked at me. And if there's one thing I've learned after all these months, it's this: silence is no longer an option when the truth needs defending. And sometimes, the one who seems weakest is the very one holding up the foundation of justice. I still remember that morning, standing in front of the Capitol. The air was crisp, the breeze light, but something inside me felt warmer than anything else. A feeling not quite of triumph, not exactly pride, but something like returning. Returning to myself, to the voice I had once lost after years of living in someone else's shadow. They led me into the grand hall, chairs arranged in neat rows, media lights already glowing from the big networks. I wore a deep blue suit, simple but solid, just like the role I was about to step into. A widow once cast aside by her own family, now standing to speak on behalf of millions who never got the chance to be heard. Seated before me were members of Congress, lawmakers, state representatives. Some leaned in attentively, others took notes rapidly. But I looked only straight ahead. I didn't speak from paper. I didn't need a script. I spoke from my heart. I used to think once I turned 60, I would spend the rest of my years in peace. But I came to realize peace, sometimes, is the cloak of deception. It's the cloth that covers the eyes of those deemed past their usefulness. I paused, looking around. Seniors in this country don't need pity. They need protection. They need the law to name the crime. coercing elders to sign papers, manipulating them emotionally to seize assets, forcing them into care facilities just to gain control. That is not a civil dispute. That is organized criminal behavior, and it must be prosecuted as such. A few nodded. Some clenched their hands on the table. I continued, not louder, but firmer. There's one thing I've learned on this journey. Never assume a quiet woman is a weak one. Sometimes, she's just waiting for the right moment to flip the table. The room went silent for a few seconds. Then applause broke out. Slow at first, then rising, echoing through the chamber. I smiled, stepped down from the podium, never looking back. Behind me, the live broadcast was still rolling, and over 2,000 miles away, in a federal prison in Missouri, a man named Nathan Carter was watching. A correctional officer told me later that at the exact moment those final words were spoken, Nathan gripped the armrest so tightly his knuckles turned white. He didn't shout, didn't lash out, just sat completely still, staring at the screen, as if for the first time realizing the game was over and his king had been checkmated. As for me, walking down the Capitol steps that day, sunlight struck the marble just enough to make me squint, but inside, I felt weightless. A group of students stood outside holding signs that read, "Silver Shield Forever," and "Thank you, Carol Whitman." A young woman approached, offering me a dried lavender bloom, her voice shaking slightly. "You're the reason I enrolled in law school. I just wanted to say thank you." I gently squeezed her hand and said simply, "Do better than me. Protect the ones who never got the chance to speak." That evening, I returned to my small house in the suburbs. Rebecca was waiting with 2 cups of hot tea and the final manuscript of the book she had poured herself into for over a year. The cover read, "Carol Whitman, the woman no one saw coming." I held the manuscript, silent for a long time. She looked at me, as if asking with her eyes, "Are you okay?" I placed my hand gently on the book. "I don't need the whole country to remember me. As long as you understand me, that's enough." Rebecca hugged me tightly. In that moment, I wasn't a symbol. I wasn't the woman who spoke at Congress, or the media figure, or the award recipient. I was just a mother. A woman who had once been broken, silenced, and had now found her voice again, and given it to millions of others. Have you ever wondered, if the ones closest to you were the ones who set the trap, would you be brave enough to step out of the shadows and fight for justice, for yourself, and for those who couldn't? My story isn't just about a mother, a wife, or an older woman. It's a reminder that each of us carries the power to change what once seemed impossible. What do you think about Carol's journey? About the difficult choices between staying silent or speaking up? Between forgiving or confronting? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear your real stories, your honest reflections about family, trust, and the choices you've had to make. And if you believe there are still stories that need to be told, quiet yet powerful stories about family, about life lessons you won't find in any newspaper, hit subscribe. The stories that follow won't just make you think. They might make you look at the people beside you in a whole new way.